Well, joining us now again is Lincoln Mitchell, political analyst and writer and adjunct associate professor of political science at Columbia University. Lincoln, thanks so much for being with us. You know, we were talking earlier about the acquittal. The American people saw the tweets. They saw the Trump rallies. They saw the rally in the hours leading up to the siege of the U.S. Capitol, and now they're seeing the acquittal by their lawmakers. What kind of message do you think that sends?
Well, it sends a message that a good chunk of the Republican Party at the end of the day thinks that what happened on January 6th isn't such a big deal. At least half of the American people see it that way. But when you say their lawmakers, it's not their lawmakers. You know, California, New York, it's not their lawmakers who voted this way. It's not Colorado. It's not Massachusetts. It's mostly lawmakers. Now, there are exceptions, Texas and Florida, from small conservative rural states. And rural white America doesn't think what happened on January 6th was a big deal or thinks that Donald Trump didn't play a role in it. So it is the quirk of the structure of our Senate that leads to the acquittal. It does not reflect the views of the American people necessarily.
Although, Lincoln, I do have to slightly disagree with you if I can. Those lawmakers are representatives of their state, but they're beholden to the U.S. Constitution. They're federal lawmakers. But I want to read you really quickly a part of Donald Trump's statement, the office of Donald J. Trump, saying, "Our historic, patriotic, and beautiful movement to make America great has only begun. In the months ahead, I have much to share with you," suggesting he's not going away. Where does he go with this?
Well, if you remember when he had that very strange rally at the end of his presidency as he was leaving, and he said, "I'll be back in some form," meaning that he's still trying to think this through. I am sure there are people around him urging him to run for president in 2024. We should be frank enough to recognize that the chances of his physical and mental health making that possible are not great.
Lincoln, I just want to interrupt you really quickly because Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader there, is speaking in the U.S. Senate. Let's have a listen.
Because he was angry, he lost an election. Former President Trump's actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. The House accused the former president of, quote, incitement. That is a specific term from the criminal law. Let me just put that aside for a moment and reiterate something I said weeks ago. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth. The issue is not only the president's intemperate language on January 6th. It is not just his endorsement of remarks in which an associate urged, quote, trial by combat. It was also the entire manufactured atmosphere of looming catastrophe, the increasingly wild myths about a reverse landslide election that was somehow being stolen, some secret coup by our now president. Now, I defended the president's right to bring any complaints to our legal system. The legal system spoke. The Electoral College spoke. As I stood up and said clearly at that time, the election was settled. It was over. But that just really opened a new chapter of even wilder and more unfounded claims the leader of the free world, cannot spend weeks thundering that shadowy forces are stealing our country and then feign surprise when people believe him and do reckless things. Now, sadly, many politicians sometimes make overheated comments or use metaphors. We saw that unhinged listeners might take literally, but that was different. That's different from what we saw. This was an intensifying crescendo of conspiracy theories orchestrated by an outgoing president who seemed determined to either overturn the voters' decision or else torch our institutions on the way out. The unconscionable behavior did not end when the violence actually began. Whatever our ex-president claims he thought might happen that day, whatever reaction he says he meant to produce by that afternoon, we know he was watching the same live television as the rest of us. A mob was assaulting the Capitol in his name. These criminals were carrying...
You're listening to the Senate Minority Leader there, Mitch McConnell, who voted to acquit the U.S. president, but now saying that Trump had a disgraceful dereliction of duty. McConnell saying there's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of that day. Of course, that day being January 6th, the siege of the U.S. Capitol. Let's go ahead and bring in Lincoln Mitchell again. And McConnell, of course, had a week to try this. When he was leading the Senate, he punted to the next Senate, but did vote to acquit the other senator from his state, Ben Sasse, voting guilty. Your thoughts about what you've been hearing from McConnell?
Rand Paul is the other senator from Kentucky. He voted for Rand Paul. McConnell here is trying to walk a tightrope. He's trying to remain respectable enough so that the media will engage with him when he tries to block Joe Biden from passing laws. He's also trying to give his Republican members cover, so that we didn't finish the speech because we cut back to me, but what he's going to say is, nonetheless, they didn't prove incitement, which is a technical legal term. So he's trying to give them cover. Yes, Trump behaved terribly, but they didn't quite prove their point. That is a distinction without a difference. So it doesn't really hold up under scrutiny. But you also see here that Mitch McConnell, who has been around a while, can't come out and say what Trump's defenders said, which was that Trump didn't incite, he didn't want this to happen. So those statements by Mitch McConnell, who was a loyal foot soldier throughout the Trump administration, does not reflect well on the former president or on what he did on January 6th and the days leading up to January 6th.
And you're right, I apologize, Ben Sasse from Nebraska. I do want to ask you about the other senators that voted guilty, including Lisa Murkowski. She's up for re-election. How do you think that impacts her?
Well, it is worth remembering that Alaska has kind of a quirky electoral system where she doesn't have a closed Republican partisan primary. And that gives her a little more wiggle room, because the danger that all of these Republicans face, most of them, whether it's Rand Paul or Josh Hawley or Mitch McConnell, is not that they'll lose in November, but that they'll lose in a Republican primary. And because of Alaska's electoral system, she has a little bit more wiggle room there than others do, because she doesn't have to go through that.
Lincoln Mitchell, from Columbia University. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insight on this historic day.
Thank you.